Welcome to Music. Today we are talking about the origins of rock and roll.
All right, everyone, buckle up. We're diving into the British invasion today, a topic I gotta admit gets me pretty fired up. You guys wanted to know if it was the seismic musical shift everyone says it was, so that's our mission today. So picture it, 1964, the Beatles hit the Ed Sullivan stage. America goes nuts for these lads from Liverpool. It's screaming fans, killer tunes, the whole nine yards.
The birth of Beatlemania.
Exactly. And it wasn't just them, was it? You had the Stones, the Who. It felt like this wave of sound just crashed right onto American shores.
That's kind of the classic story of the British invasion, yeah. But like with a lot of history, context is everything.
Which is what makes these deep dives so interesting, wouldn't you say?
For sure. Because, see, what a lot of folks forget is that by the early 60s, Elvis was already a global force. And Elvis, his music, it didn't just sit still. It was always evolving.
Oh, totally. Elvis started bringing in those gospel influences pretty early on in his career, which I always found fascinating.
And get this, right? Around when the Beatles show up, Elvis is really into that smooth Nashville sound. That timing. It's not just happenstance, it tells us something about how ready the music scene was for something new.
And Elvis's sales figures by 61 were massive, like even before Beatlemania really took hold. Hold on to your hats, because we're talking a staggering 75 million records globally. To put that in perspective, that was more than any other artist. Worldwide, he was a phenomenon.
He had that charisma, that magnetism that transcended borders, you know. Elvis represented rebellion, this raw, untapped energy that captivated audiences.
And, speaking of being open to British culture, there's something super interesting in the Wikipedia article 4 of that decade's Best Picture Oscars. They were British films before the Beatles really hit, mind you. So seems like American audiences were already kind of vibing with British culture.
That makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was the Britishness of the invasion really as new as we think? I mean, those films winning big, that suggests an openness way beyond just music, almost like America was primed for something to shake things up, and the British invasion, it just provided the perfect soundtrack.
It wasn't just the music, though, was it? British fashion was all the rage. Those BSA motorcycles were the thing to have. Heck, even American TV got a dose of British cool with all those spy shows popping up.
Oh, for sure. And we can't forget mod culture, which had a huge impact on the look and sound of the whole British invasion.
Oh, absolutely. For those who might not be familiar, mod was all about that sleek, modern look, sharp suits, cool haircuts, tons of attitude. It was a direct challenge to all those stuffy old traditions and the British invasion bands. They embodied that rebellious spirit perfectly.
Totally. They brought that energy to the world stage, and it resonated with young people who were hungry for something different, something that reflected their own desire for change. And here's where Elvis gets really interesting. See, his music, it was this incredible blend, pulling from gospel, country, even sounds from Black artists who came before him.
He kind of wove it all together into something totally new.
Exactly. Elvis, he wasn't creating in a vacuum, and neither were those British bands. It all builds on what came before. Take the Statesmen, for example, a gospel group Elvis really dug. Their shows, man, electric. We're talking audiences so captivated, women are screaming, preachers are fanning themselves. Sound familiar?
It's eerie almost, right? Like a sneak peek at the hysteria the Beatles and the Stones would cause.
Right. And speaking of those gospel roots, we can't forget Hound Dog. I mean, that wasn't just a hit. It was Elvis merging rhythm and blues with rock and roll. He took a song originally by Big Mama Thornton, a Black artist, and made it his own, brought it to a whole new audience.
Which is huge GE, right? It shows how Elvis was breaking down those barriers between genres. In a way, he set the stage for the British invasion to do the same thing, pulling from American blues and rock, but adding their own spin on it.
Exactly. Think about it. The Beatles. Hugely into Chuck Berry, Little Richard. But they brought in this melodic sensibility, these lyrics that were totally them. The Stones, they tapped into that raw energy of guys like Muddy Waters, but with this gritty, rebellious edge that became their signature.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, you know? And even though Elvis, he faced his own struggles later on, there's no denying that early impact. It's like he primed the pump for this wave of music to sweep in.
100%. His influence, it went way beyond just how many records he sold. He changed the whole landscape, made it possible for bands like the Beatles and Stones to take the world by storm.
And how did America react to all this? Well, some bands, they definitely felt the pressure. You can't talk about this without mentioning Paul Revere and the Raiders rocking up in full Revolutionary War getup Talk about a statement.
It's funny, isn't it? Even trying to resist, they were acknowledging the power of the British invasion. They had to address it to fight back, and even then, you can hear those British influences creeping into their music.
For sure. And it wasn't all about fighting back either. That British sound, it was already brewing here in the States. Bands like the Byrds were already messing with those folk rock vibes that would become a hallmark of the British invasion.
The Byrds are a perfect example. Mr. Tambourine Man, with those jangly guitars and thoughtful lyrics, pure folk rock. And you can't forget about the Beach Boys. They're often linked to that California surf sound, but they were also exploring harmonies, songwriting, things they picked up from those British invasion bands.
You know, thinking about Woodstock, it's a few years after the whole British invasion thing, but that festival was huge. Jimi Hendrix played there, and he had his own connection to the British scene. Seems like it shows how much American culture had really shifted.
Woodstock is really interesting, yeah. It kind of brings together all these threads we've been talking about. I mean, you've got Hendrix, American-born, but he really made his name as a guitarist over in England. He was a sensation there before coming back to the States.
A real musical exchange program.
Right. And the thing about Woodstock is it wasn't just about one style of music, you know? You had American folk icons like Joan Baez on the same stage as British rock groups like The Who. It showed how the lines were getting blurry between genres, even between countries when it came to music.
But Woodstock became this big melting pot of creativity.
Exactly. So it makes you think, doesn't it? Was there really a British invasion in the way we usually talk about it?
Yeah, like, it was more of a perfect storm.
That's a great way to put it. You had Elvis, right? Changing the game, pushing boundaries, showing that there was a hunger for something different. American audiences, particularly young people, they were ready for it.
And then these British bands show up with their own style and influences, and it just clicked.
Exactly. The British invasion, it wasn't just the music in a vacuum. It was reflecting a cultural shift, a feeling of rebellion, of possibility. And that resonated on both sides of the pond.
So less of an invasion, more like a transatlantic collaboration then. This musical conversation that pushed everyone.
That's what's so great about these deep dives, isn't it? It's rarely a simple answer. It's about seeing how everything connects, the context, and even those what-if questions we're left with.
Like, what if Elvis hadn't passed away when he did? Could you imagine him jamming with the Beatles? Or trading licks with Eric Clapton?
Yeah, that's a thought. The music they could have made. Well, guess we'll never know. Hey, fun to imagine, right?
Totally. It just goes to show music history is full of surprises. Thanks for exploring this with us today, and until next time, keep those turntables spinning.
Welcome To is dedicated to exploring new technology to create informative and entertaining media. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more. Leave a comment if you have an idea for an episode that we should start researching. Thank you for listening.